So, as we were saying, Pythagoreanism represents the shift from a schizophrenic animist culture of gods and personifications to a more conceptual culture. And it represents this kind of intermediate form. Spangler might call it a pseudomorphosis, really between the ancient Homeric Greece, which was a high culture, which was a very sophisticated culture, but it was a culture that was in touch with gods. Now, today we live in an age of atheism. We're unable to get in touch with these gods. We're unable to have hallucinations. We're unable to be schizophrenic in the majority. Now, some people are capable of doing this. Rudolf Steiner, for example, was someone who reported to be in contact with the dead, to be in contact with spirits from other planes. To me, this just means he was more similar in his psychology to ancient man. He was not some kind of freak necessarily. I'm not trying to use the term schizophrenia in the same way that we can talk about autism, right? We can say a person who's autistic is someone who really, doesn't understand metaphors, and they're very straightforward. So the autistic person is kind of the hyper-conceptual person, the person who doesn't care for images, doesn't care for God, doesn't care for religion. The hyper-autistic person is someone who only cares about concepts. So this is a hyper-spirited person, really, whereas the schizophrenic person is a hyper-soulful person. And, I'm not even passing a moral judgment there. I know mental illness is something that when we start to use these terms, people have negative connotations. But I'm just trying to describe different aspects of human psychology, ancient psychology, modern psychology, that we as a globe, and The Bicameral Mind is a book that describes this, where we shift as a globe from a more schizophrenic culture to a more autistic culture, from a more soulful culture to a more spirited culture, from a more image-based culture to a more conceptual culture. So this is just a trend that's been going on for a very long time, and it really does relate to this dynamic between the left wing and the right wing, where the left wing really is more the conceptual. It really is more the worship of the concept, whereas the right wing really is more schizophrenic. It really is more worshiping the image and the tradition. So from this, we can understand why things have been moving in a leftward direction, why classical liberalism is a left-wing ideology. Any people who claim to be right-wing are usually just classical liberals. The only people who, in my mind, can be truly right-wing are the schizophrenic, or people who are in touch with the schizophrenic, people who are in touch with spirits and ghosts and things like that. I personally am not. I personally don't dwell upon my astrological birth chart. I don't dwell upon, spirits. I can't hear people from other planes. So I don't have this ability. I'm not tapped into this. But certain people are, certain mediums, people like this are tapped into it. I'm not empirically saying that what they are perceiving is accurate. Like when they say, oh, I'm talking to your dead relatives, or I'm talking to aliens, or I'm talking to angels and demons. I don't really care what's out there. I don't care about other planes. I'm not concerned with that in this discussion. What I'm simply describing is a psychological phenomenon that really does relate to what we call left wing and right wing. And because we globally as a species are headed toward this conceptual side of things, we're headed toward the left wing. That the left wing and the conceptual and the spirited are all tied together, whereas the right wing and the schizophrenic and the traditional and the imaginary, the world of image, that is all connected. And the two are fighting against each other, and the left wing has been winning not just for the last 500 years, but if we look at Pythagoras, the transition from Homeric Greece to Pythagorean Greece, we can say it's at least been going on for 2,600 years. This happened before the birth of Christ, before Christianity, but Christianity, of course, accelerated this process. And we can say perhaps it even began before Judaism, but we can say that Judaism was a part of this process. So clearly, we can even say that the invention of writing, the invention of numbers, right, the first alphabet, or even hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics clearly are imaginary. They are of the image. but they're taking the image and they're reducing it to a sound or a phoneme or a concept or a symbol rather than the thing itself. And so even ancient hieroglyphics, which span back thousands of years, have to do with this shift from the schizophrenic to the conceptual. Even the shift from a hunter-gatherer culture to an agriculturist culture represents a shift from the schizophrenic to the conceptual, from right-wing to left-wing. That is fundamentally what I'm trying to get across here, that there is this huge historical, evolutionary, biological, psychological process going on for thousands and thousands of years, at least 10,000 years, and if we consider the conflict between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, which spans back perhaps now 200,000 years, because new evidence has been found in Greece that Homo sapiens did not arrive in Europe 40,000 years ago. They actually arrived hundreds of thousands of years ago. This is what the new archaeological evidence is saying, and I doubted it for a long time. I said 40,000 years, 40,000 years, 40,000 years. That was the number I was sticking with because that's what mainstream science said. But if we're finding Homo sapiens skeletons in caves in Greece, and they're carbon dated to 80,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or 200,000 years ago, then clearly this war between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals has been going on for a very long time. And we don't know a lot about the psychology of Neanderthals, but they had very big brains. And one of the theories about Neanderthals is that they tended to be more autistic. This is one theory. And that's an interesting theory. I'm not sure if I trust that theory. I'm not sure I believe in that theory. Because my theory about Neanderthals is that they were highly adapted to their environment. And they were not capable of leaving their environment. Their environment was the boreal zone, or the boreal zone. This, or we could say the Hyperborean zone, the zone from Europe venturing into Asia and Siberia. This was their zone. This was the climate they were adjusted to, because they were perfectly mentally, instinctually adapted. They knew everything about, and if you read a series called Clan of the Cave Bear, it speculates about this idea that Neanderthals had ancestor memories. They could literally remember things their ancestors had done. This is how fine-tuned their brains were. It contained encoded information about their ancestors. Now, genetically, you might think that's impossible, but you're also attracted to the human body, just like every other animal is attracted to its own animal type. Now, of course, you can get dogs to copulate with cats, and there are all kinds of weird instances out there. You can have dolphins, male dolphins with male dolphins, right? So you can get all these kinds of variations in nature. But still, there is the point that animals are attracted to their own type. And what this means to me, you could say it's just imprinting, it's kind of like a ancient animalistic Freudian imprinting where they see a dog sees its parents, the parent looks like a dog, and so then it's sexually attracted to dogs. So there's that theory of imprinting, which is a behavioralist approach to psychology, but I think it's something deeper than that. I think that you can have a culture where people are never exposed to genitalia whatsoever, such as Orthodox Jewish culture, never exposed to pictures of genitalia, and yet the moment they see genitalia for the first time, after they're married and having sex for the first time, it's extremely stimulating to them. And not because it's been culturally imprinted upon them, but because genetically we do have images. We still have the aspect of the imaginary, of the soul, of schizophrenia within us, and I'm using that term not in a negative sense. If anything, I'm using it in a positive sense to say that we have images in our brain which already contain meaning. It's not a concept. It's not, oh, I see you have a sexual reproductive organ, and that stimulates me because I'm thinking of the concept of childbirth, and I'm thinking like in some very convoluted explanation of why I want to have children. It's all conceptual. No, it's not what's happening. Sex is schizophrenic. Sex is soulful. Sex is imaginary. Sex is about you're looking at the image itself, and the image itself is beautiful. Forget about what it means instinctually. Forget about evolutionary psychology for a minute. Forget about those justifications. The female body, the male body, the body in itself is beautiful, and it's attractive, and it's full of power and energy, regardless of the concepts that it relates to. Oh, well, the muscles relate to testosterone, and the breasts relate to the ability for the woman to take care of the children. We have all these explanations. But at the end of the day, we still do have this aspect of instinct. And so my theory about Neanderthals is the reason why they couldn't escape their their specific environments because they were so well adapted to it, because they were very instinctual, not because they were autistic. Autism is the opposite. Autism is where you're extremely conceptual and you're only concerned with concepts. I don't believe Neanderthals were only concerned with concepts. I believe Neanderthals were extremely concerned with images. I believe they were extremely concerned, for instance, with their tools. They had tools. They were extremely concerned with what is the image of the tool, not the concept of the tool. They weren't like, well, how do I make a tool that's going to kill an animal? They were like, no. They were in love with the shape of the tool itself. They were in love with the geometry itself, the image itself. They weren't concerned about the practicality, but they had cults of tools. And if you watch Arvo's prehistory series, he talks about this cult of the Neanderthal. Now, the stuff about Atlantis and the stuff about this and that and the other thing, you know, I'm not willing to go that far because I don't have enough information to defy the mainstream. If I don't have enough information to defy the mainstream, I'm just going to go with the mainstream. So, but at least what we have about the record of who the Neanderthals were, how they acted, they seem to me to be very schizophrenic, not autistic. The theories of people like JF are that Neanderthals were autistic. I'm actually not sure if he promotes that theory, but I know people have promoted this idea that Neanderthals were autistic. The more autistic you are, I think I'm forgetting what the stupid school. I shouldn't say stupid because I shouldn't be demeaning. But there is a school which is diametrically opposed to what I'm saying. Oh, Neanderthals were autistic, and the more autistic you are, the more Neanderthal you are. I'm not sure I believe that. And maybe the problem here is I'm just putting these categories of autism and schizophrenia in terms of being biometric or diametrically opposed, when perhaps there is some overlap. Perhaps this distinction is not as black and white as I'm making it out to be. I think clearly autistic people can be fascinated with forms and images, and maybe not be as extroverted about it, maybe not as social about it, but still they look at objects as having meaning and beauty, whereas other people who are not autistic, they don't care about this. Oh, you're obsessed with your toy train collection, that's stupid. Whereas autistic people, they see value and meaning and beauty in material objects, which could be a kind of a schizophrenia if you think about it. So perhaps maybe I'm the stupid one in setting up this dichotomy between autism and schizophrenia, when maybe they're a related phenomenon of the idea of looking at an object and saying, this is a beautiful object, this has value, beyond the concept of the object, beyond its utility, beyond its capitalistic nature. So maybe the Neanderthals were a fusion of hyper-autistic and hyper-schizophrenic, in the sense that they looked at objects and they were obsessed with tool making for its own sake, not for practicality's sake, but for its own sake, because it was evolutionary beneficial at the end of the day. That's the conceptual justification. But they were really interested in the tool as a person, in the tool as a lover, in the tool as a soul spirit partner. They would name their weapons. And this didn't just die with the Neanderthals, because of course the Neanderthals weren't completely wiped out. They were absorbed into the European Homo sapiens. And so some of these traditions continue. As well as other populations. East Asians have Neanderthal DNA, so this continues. And, schizophrenia and the anthropomorphization of objects is also something we see in native African cultures, which don't have any Neanderthal admixture. So we can't really create, as much as I'm trying to create clear black and white distinctions here to simplify a model for people to understand what's going on, I don't know if that's a legitimate thing to do. But really what I'm trying to demonstrate is that the history of left and right is a history of concepts versus images, of utilitarianism versus the love, the beauty of the thing of itself. Pythagoreanism represents a major shift, invention of alphabet's a major shift, and shift to agriculturalism, a major shift, from the so-called right wing to the so-called left wing. This is something that's just been happening time immemorial, it seems like, and putting in a Franco or putting in a Bismarck or putting in a Donald Trump, even with a military dictatorship behind him, to change policies here and there, putting in a Vladimir Putin, doesn't actually change the underlying psychological, cultural, historical, religious, and spiritual foundations of the left-right divide. That is a lot deeper than just, oh, well, Ocasio-Cortez is crazy, and we need to have a civil war so the right wing can put Ron Paul as the president, we can abolish the Federal Reserve, and bring back the Constitution. It's not that simple, especially when you understand that America, the so-called conservative America, was founded by left-wing radicals. George Washington was a left-wing Freemason radical. And Freemasonry is the foundation of all this left-wing globalism and everything else. Now, of course, it's not as important today as it was then. It sort of died out of favor. Like, for instance, Jeffrey Epstein, I don't think he's a Freemason, but it's not that he's entirely divorced from that Freemasonic tradition. But he's not, I don't think he walks around wearing Freemasonry paraphernalia. He doesn't associate with those rituals. He doesn't associate with those symbols. That's not his in-group. That's not his tribe. But clearly the Freemasons started something, and they were continuing a tradition of classical liberalism, which ultimately comes out of the Renaissance, which ultimately comes out of Pythagoreanism. They're following this whole tradition, which is a left-wing tradition, and people like Jeffrey Epstein are continuing that. So again, I just think that my ultimate point is that when we talk about, oh, the right wing, we're totally going to win the Civil War, we're going to crush the left wing, we're going to get Tucker Carlson or whoever your dream president would be, we're going to get him as president, we're going to crush the left wing. It's a very superficial analysis. Even if we give you all this stuff, which I dispute the idea that a Civil War is coming. I dispute the idea that the right wing could win this Civil War. Several factors, logistical and everything else. But at the end of the day, I think if the right wing, quote-unquote, won a Civil War, who would they put in power? Would they put me in power? Would they put you in power? Who are they going to put in power? They're going to put a Donald Trump figure in there, or Francisco Franco, or an Otto von Bismarck, someone who on the surface seems very right-wing, like he's going to do all the right-wing things. But underneath and in the background deals, he is pushing the same cultural, psychological, spiritual force which has been present and moving forward throughout humanity like a wave, like a ripple through human history from thousands upon thousands of years ago to the present day. We're continuing in this direction. And so my question is not, how do we start a civil war? I don't want that. My question is not, how do we win a civil war? I don't want that either, because I think all you're going to get is a controlled opposition, fake Bismarck, Franco, Trump figure as your new president, who is just going to lead us down the same path. You look at Spain, you look at Greece, you look at these countries, they've moved to the left. The Philippines had a dictatorship, they've moved to the left. Dictatorships don't fundamentally change the iceberg of the country. The dictator and his period of dictatorship is like this little tip of the iceberg, and underneath there's all these cultural, intellectual, spiritual forces that are bubbling and broiling and like in a cauldron. And this is actually when the left has their field day, because we're oppressed by the dictator. And that's when they have their cultural renaissance. And they gather all this spiritual energy. So when the dictator dies, they can come back with a vengeance. And they can go back twofold. I mean, the same thing. Pinochet is a great example of this phony, classical liberal right-winger who gets in power. This is the problem Julius Evola had with the Nazis. Julius Evola said the Nazis, they're demagogues, they're moderates, they're populists, they have this democratic element to them. They're not true right-wingers, and they're too scientific, and they're too empirical, and they're too friendly to the British and the Anglos. And they have all these problems. And of course, I'm simplifying, putting words in his mouth here. But he was saying that ultimately the Nazis are just a brief period of dictatorship that's going to lead back to the same democratic mess we had before. And you would really need a kind of schizophrenia. You would need a kind of spiritualism. You need to bring back astrology. You need to bring back ritual. You need to bring back paganism. This is what he was advocating. And of course, he didn't really have a chance. He didn't really have any influence. He didn't have the ability to implement that. No one really has the ability to implement that, because that's not what the power currents are flowing. See, the universe is full of energy. This is just scientifically true. I'm not just being a new age hippie here. The universe is full of energy, and we can harness that energy. So that we don't create energy. Human beings do not create energy. We consume. That's all we do. The sun creates energy. Well, it doesn't even create energy. It's letting off energy. It's expanding energy. As it burns, it emits radiation. That radiation is energy that we harness in the form of light, UV light, infrared light, and visible light here on the Earth. and plants can use that to photosynthesize, and animals can eat plants, and we can eat animals. And so we can harness the energy the universe is giving us, specifically the sun, or geothermal energy. There are many different kinds of energy. But whether it's geothermal or whether it's from the sun, ultimately there are these huge galactic planetary objects, stars, that are emitting energy, and we can harness it. We're not creating it. We're just harnessing energy. And I think the same is true for the scientific world, which is absolutely scientifically true. The same is true for the cultural world. There is a current of energy. There's a wave. There's a ripple. There is a current flowing through human history, which is going toward the left, which is going toward the spirit rather than the soul, which is going toward the concept. It's going toward all these things, and it's destroying in its wake tradition and image and all of these things that were instinctually attached to. Remember, the Neanderthal, as I conceive, was someone who was extremely interested in the shape of the arrowhead, the spearhead. He was extremely interested in personality. He was extremely interested in his environment. He was in love with Mother Gaia, right? And he didn't even have a concept. He didn't have a word. He didn't even necessarily have a spoken language. But he was just so in tune with nature. He's so embedded in the magical reality of this pantheistic, schizophrenic world. He was perfectly adapted to it. But Homo sapiens was universally adapted because it had this addition of the concept. And with that concept, it could change from one environment to another environment, eventually overwhelmed Neanderthal. But Neanderthal still hung on as an ancestral ghost population within Homo sapiens. And so we still have some of that today. We still have people like naming their weapons. You know, we still have people anthropomorphizing the universe and trying to get in touch with God. But we're losing that connection. We're losing our connection to God. So what does the future hold? Is it a civil war that's going to save us? Is it Donald Trump? Is it Berlusconi? Is it all these fake right-wing people? Is it the Nazis, who, again, Julius Evola noted, these ultimately are fake right-wing people. These are not real right-wing people. Because they're not, as Heidegger said, they're not questioning the role of technology in society. They were as much technological as any other, as the British, as the Russians, as the Americans. So they're not fundamentally questioning really the underbelly of the iceberg here. So what does the future hold? My contention is that artificial intelligence or gene editing is going to move us beyond the human species. I don't know what direction we're going in. We're going to move beyond the human species. And at some point, in the same way that the Neanderthals were pre-programmed instinctually, that they had a deep connection to things in their environment in a way that we don't have. We conceptually, we say, oh, that's a tree. We could cut it down. We could make it into a fire. We could make it into a boat. We could make some tools. They look at the tree and they just see the utilitarian concept of the tree. But the Neanderthal saw the tree as a spirit. And again, you see this in Germanic paganism because 2,000 years ago, Homo sapiens or European Homo sapiens had a higher, in my opinion, they had a higher Neanderthal admixture. And so they really did look at trees as being like people, as having souls. As again, in the word soul meaning image, essentially, the image of the tree was a holistic, it was a god, it was a deity. It was something beautiful, it was something to be worshipped. The snowflake, each individual snowflake was its own soul. I mean, this is just, it's a very schizophrenic world. But this is the world that they had. My idea with gene editing and artificial intelligence is we can get back to a world where we start, our instincts are directly plugged into the reality that we're dealing with. Right now there's this barrier called the concept, and the concept is this medium through which we interact with reality. So it's not that we are not directly touching atoms, we're not directly interacting with the world, we have this hyper-modern internet. You're not watching me, you're not touching me, you're not intimately connected with me, you're watching me through a screen through the internet, you're watching a simulacrum, you're thinking about the concept of me, you're thinking about my avatar. You don't know me as a person, and I don't know you, but I'm interacting with the audience as an avatar of the audience, as a simulation, as a concept. I'm interacting with the concept, you're interacting with the concept. This is the situation we're living in, where it's purely conceptual mediums that we interact with, and we can never actually be intimate with one another, never really touch each other. We can't connect with God. We can have the Pythagorean concept of God, or we can have some kind of deistic concept of God. but we can't actually have the ecstatic experience, the ecstatic schizophrenic experience of literally listening to God talking to you. It's such an amazing experience that we are no longer in touch with. There are just a few talented individuals like Rudolf Steiner, like mediums, like spiritual people who are able to engage with that ancestral part of the human psychology, but most of us have lost it, including myself. So I think that gene editing or artificial intelligence is going to create a form of consciousness that is able to directly plug back into reality. It's no longer going to need this idea of the concept to mediate reality, but it's going to be able to directly connect with reality. Right now, I am an organic carbon-based life form going through the medium of the electronic internet. The electronic internet is then perceiving me. It's decompressing the image. It's creating a video at 60 frames per second or whatever, 20 frames per second. And then it's spitting it out on your computer, on your screen. You might be watching on a TV. You might watch on a phone. It doesn't matter. You might not even watch. You might convert it to an MP3 and just listen. And so there's all these levels of conversion and intermediary steps, and we're just looking at the concepts. People are just listening to my arguments. That's why people have such a hard time. Conceptual focused people have a hard time with my videos because they're like, oh, you're rambling. You're all over the place. Get to the point. Tell me, what's wrong with John Mark? Well, I've told you in a roundabout way. I haven't just given you 5 bullet points of why John Mark is wrong. I've traversed the universe, in a sense. And people are looking for the concepts. They're listening for the concepts. What's your argument, dude? Stop being so esoteric. Stop obscuring everything. Stop bringing in all of this extraneous material. We don't need this. We just need the bare bone concepts. We just need the utilitarian. We just need the utilitarian argument. And then once you've convinced us with your logic and facts and reason, BTFO'd with logic, facts, and reason, then we'll finally understand. We'll have a solution to our problems. We'll be able to move on. But that, my friends, will never be a solution. Logic, facts, and reason will never be a solution because they can never solve this dilemma of we are ancestrally schizophrenic, we're ancestrally instinctual, we're tied in with what Schopenhauer calls the will, we're tied in with spirit and soul, we're tied in, well, I guess I'm using the word spirit in the wrong place there, but we're tied in with really elemental stuff. And Hillman talks about this, where he says, should mention Hillman's first name because I have it pulled up, James Hillman. James Hillman, author of The Soul's Code, Re-envisioning Psychology. So James Hillman, he says the reason we're depressed and suicidal is because we're not in touch with the soul, we're in touch with the spirit. And the soul is the realm of introversion, and the spirit's the realm of extroversion. And the soul is the realm of images, and the spirit's the realm of concepts. And the spirit is the extrovert, the utilitarian, the social butterfly, and the soulful person is the introvert who contemplates God and who hears the voice of God. And the soulful person is the Neanderthal, and the spirited person is the Homo sapien. And the spirited person is Kurt Doolittle. Sorry to say that. And the soulful person is not Kurt Doolittle. And you have to recognize this is a psychological problem. This is why we're committing suicide. Not just of Western civilization, but of all civilizations are committing suicide. Oh, the Africans are having 8 kids and the Muslims are having 8 kids. Well, that's not true. That's not true in terms of the velocity of their fertility. Yes, in terms of the current statistics or the current rate of fertility, yeah, it is 8 kids per woman. But if you actually look at the change over time, the fertility is going toward a massive drop-off. You look at it in Iran. Iran is below replacement rate fertility. Nobody knows about this. Nobody talks about this. This is what's happening in Iran. Not in the West, in Iran. This is what's happening in South Korea. This is what's happening in Argentina. This is what's happening all over the world. This is what's going to continue to happen globally. So we're all confronting this problem of we have lost the soul, and we're completely in this spirited, it's this energetic, frenetic, hypertension, anxiety that we're in. And when people try to get back to the soul, they find it in suicide and depression and emo music and goth culture, dark, evil culture, somber culture, listening to I don't want to go to a church, and this is really frustrating. You go to a church and they're just singing happy, sanguine Christian music. Oh, God is awesome. God loves you. It's like, no, I want like some Lord have mercy. And I don't want the, oh, lordy, lordy. I don't want that sanguine. I want to get in cult, and this is a Northern European problem because Northern Europeans were hunter-gatherers longer than any other European group. And so they hung on to this concept of the soul, and they hung on to the concept that is then called melancholy and soulfulness and introversion and brooding. This is the Northern European culture. So there's a desire, you want to go to church, and you don't want just sanguine happiness. You want to get in touch. It's therapeutic, it's cathartic, it's natural for Northern Europeans to go in a church where it's somber, where it's serious, where it is, it's not just happiness and butterflies, because that's fake. That's fake. So James Hillman is describing a process by seeking out depression. We actually want to be depressed. We want to seek out depression. We want to seek out suicide because we want to get in touch with this deeper part of ourselves. We want to come in conflict with this. The reason we're obsessed with suicide and serial killers is because we are divorced from death. Because we're obsessed with extending people's lives. I say cut it off. I mean, the concept that a conservative Christian is about putting Terry Schiavo on, this is one of the first political events I ever heard of, was the Terry Schiavo, on the life support. And that's disgusting because we're hiding from death. And in hiding from death, we're just going to crawl back to it in another form. Liberalism as a form of ideological suicide. We're not in present with death. We're not touching death. We need to experience it. We need to, if we want to get back in tune with our instincts, we need to increase child mortality. We need to watch people die. We need to be in physical contact with dead people. This is, we need to wander through the graveyards wearing, makeup and all black clothes and have black umbrellas. I mean, I've never done it, but I'm just saying that those types of expressions are symptomatic and purposeful in a deep way. It's not just silly. It's not just a weird person. There is a logic behind it. There's a meaning. There's a method to the madness. So ultimately, I'm not really suggesting some kind of goth emo imperium take over the world, but I mean, it would be nice just to have a church. If I could just go to a goth emo church where people would just be sad and crying, and you could really get in touch with death and negativity. This is something that other cultures, actually do still have contact with. Third world cultures, the Mexican Day of the Dead. Halloween, the problem with Halloween is it's this sanguine turn. And it's this fearful, frightening turn. It's fight or flight. But that's not what the soul is about. The soul is not about encountering death in a fight or, oh my gosh, it's death, I'm scared. My heartbeat races, and I want to run away or I want to fight something. That's not what it's about. It's about confronting death in a somber, sad way. And even the Day of the Dead has this problem where they've made it into this, oh, it's happy, we're all wearing skeletons, it's fun. And the same thing with Halloween, they've made it into a sanguine event. It's not what it's meant to be. We've lost we've lost the ability to be in contact with that aspect of our psychology, which is important that we're in contact with it. And all you have is like emo music and goth culture, sadly enough. But that's the state of things where they are. And what I'm saying is not that we're going to go back into that, and that's a final solution. What I'm saying is that as life on Earth and consciousness evolves beyond humanity through gene editing or artificial intelligence, there are going to be consciousnesses that are created and evolve in such a way, as JF's book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, describes. They're going to evolve in such a way that they're able to be directly in touch with reality in a way that we aren't. All of our experiences are mediated through the internet and hypermodernism and hyperreality and the avatar. And nothing is real anymore. Everything's a simulacrum. That problem is a problem of technology does not match up with our human psychology. The one was not made for the other. They are not in sync. There is this constant dissonance. We could say even genes are a technology, and therefore the dissonance between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and the different environments was a form of technological dissonance in its own time. We could say that, you know, the agriculturalism and the alphabet, very similar technological dissonance. Urbanism, technological dissonance. So technological dissonance, Ted Kaczynski was right. It's been around for a very long time. He didn't understand the scale and scope of it. He only understood the Industrial Revolution. That's all he understood. He was a very limited thinker in that sense. But he was getting at something which is true. But you can't solve it with violence and bombs. The only way you can solve it, you cannot destroy technology. Technology is the thing whose time has come. You can't destroy technology. We can't go back to living anarcho-primitivism. But what we can do is we can give birth, either through our own evolution or through the evolution of a third party, we can give birth to a new consciousness which is capable, which is adaptable enough to integrate directly into reality. And that's going to solve this problem. So we're not going to solve it. We're still in a state of transition. We've been in a state of transition for thousands of years. So the idea that we're going to have a civil war and everything's going to go back to 1776 and we're going to be conservative Tea Party patriots again and everything's going to be great and it'll be Trump 2.0, that's going to be a failure. As much as Trump is frustrating people and people don't understand, why can't Donald Trump just do what he says he's going to do? Why can't he just do the things? Because it's so out of his control. It's so out of any individual's control to do that. So I think this about finishes it up. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.